The night Lyra was born, every star in the sky blazed brighter than the sun for 3 sacred seconds. The elders whispered that such a celestial event had not occurred in over 1,000 years, not since the last star-born guardian walked the earth before the Alpha bloodlines rose to power and erased their legacy from history. In the small Omega quarter of the Silver Night Kingdom, her mother Celeste held her newborn daughter close, feeling the strange warmth radiating from the child's skin, watching as faint silver marks appeared and disappeared across her tiny arms like constellations trying to write themselves into existence. Celeste knew in that moment that her daughter was either blessed beyond measure or cursed beyond redemption, and in a world ruled by alphas who feared anything they could not control, the line between blessing and curse was dangerously thin. 23 years later, Lyra had learned to make herself invisible in every way that mattered. She kept her eyes downcast when alphas passed, worked double shifts at the textile mill without complaint, and never spoke unless directly addressed. The silver marks that had danced across her skin as an infant had faded to almost nothing, appearing now only as the faintest shimmer when moonlight touched her wrists, something she always kept covered with long sleeves and leather bands. She had watched too many Omegas disappear for showing signs of anything unusual, their families receiving official letters about relocations that everyone knew meant something far more permanent. In the Silver Night Kingdom, Omegas existed to serve, to submit, and above all to never question the natural order that kept alphas in power, and Omegas in chains that were called tradition. The Alpha King Kalen Silvernight ruled from his fortress of black stone and silver towers, a monument to Alpha supremacy that could be seen from every corner of his vast territory. He had inherited the throne at 19 when his father was assassinated by Omega rebels, an event that hardened whatever compassion might have existed in his young heart and transformed him into the most ruthless ruler the kingdom had ever known. His laws were absolute, his punishments severe, and his belief in alpha superiority unshakable. Yet in the dark hours of night, when he stood alone on his balcony overlooking the kingdom, Kalen felt the weight of a destiny he did not fully understand, a pull toward something his grandfather had whispered about. On his deathbed, a prophecy that had been locked away in the forbidden archives for 3 generations. If you are enjoying this story of cosmic destiny and forbidden power, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more supernatural romance that will leave you breathless. Drop a comment telling us what you think will happen when Lyra and Kalen finally meet, because trust me, the stars have plans that neither of them can escape. The prophecy had been discovered carved into meteoric stone 200 years before Kalen's birth, written in a language that only the oldest scholars could partially translate. It spoke of an Omega, born under the eclipse of 3 moons and 13 stars, a child who would carry the blood of the star-born guardians, the ancient race that had ruled before alphas claimed dominance through violence and deception. This Omega would rise with power drawn directly from the cosmos itself, power that could shatter the foundations of alpha rule, and restore the balance that had been destroyed when the Guardians were hunted to extinction. The prophecy named her the Celestial Reckoning, and it promised that her awakening would mark either the transformation or the destruction of the kingdom, depending on the choices of those who stood in her path. When Kalen's grandfather showed him the prophecy at age 15, he also showed him the secret records of every Omega, born under unusual celestial events for the past 2 centuries. 47. Omegas had been quietly eliminated, their deaths made to look like accidents, illnesses, or disappearances. The burden of these murders had driven his grandfather to madness in his final years, but the tradition continued because the alternative, allowing the prophecy to fulfill itself, was unthinkable to those who benefited from the current order. Kalen had added 12 names to that list during his reign, 12 Omegas, whose only crime was being born when the stars aligned in suspicious patterns. He told himself it was necessary, that he was protecting his people, that the stability of the kingdom was worth the price of innocent blood. Then came the night of the triple eclipse, an astronomical event that occurred once every 1,000 years, when 3 moons aligned perfectly with 13 specific stars, creating a celestial pattern that ancient texts called the crown of eternity. Kalen's astronomers had been tracking this event for decades, and every scholar of the forbidden. Prophecy knew what it meant. If the celestial reckoning had not yet been born, she would be born on this night. If she already existed, her powers would awaken under this alignment. Kalen mobilized his elite guards, the Shadowbound, warriors trained specifically to hunt and eliminate Omega threats. Their orders were clear: find any Omega showing signs of unusual power during the eclipse, and eliminate them immediately. No trials, no questions, no mercy. Lyra was walking home from her shift when the eclipse began. She had stayed late to finish an order, and the Omega Quarter streets were unusually empty as most of her people had locked themselves inside, superstitious fear keeping them away from windows during such a rare celestial event. She was halfway across the central square when the first moon slid into perfect alignment, and suddenly her entire body erupted in silver light. The marks on her wrists blazed to life, spreading across her arms, her shoulders, her chest. Writing, themselves in ancient star script that hurt to read but sang with recognition in her soul. She fell to her knees as power unlike anything she had ever imagined poured into her from the sky itself, from the aligned moons and the 13 stars that formed the crown of eternity directly above her. The transformation was agony and ecstasy intertwined. Lyra felt her Omega nature, which she had been taught was weakness, reveal itself as something entirely different, a conduit for cosmic energy that had nothing to do with the Alpha and Omega dynamics the kingdom had constructed. She was not weak. She had never been weak. She had been sleeping, and now the universe itself was waking her up. Memories that were not her own flooded her mind. Visions of the starborn guardians who had ruled with wisdom and compassion before they were betrayed and slaughtered by ambitious alphas who rewrote history to justify their theft of power. She saw her mother's true face. Not the broken Omega who had died when Lyra was 7, but a guardian in hiding, protecting her daughter by suppressing her own power until it killed her. The Shadowbound found her in the square, still on her knees, silver light pouring from her eyes and mouth as the eclipse reached totality. Their leader, a scarred alpha named Dracon, who had killed more Omegas than he could count, raised his blessed silver blade to strike her down. The blade never fell. The stars themselves reached down in beams of solid light, forming a barrier around Lyra that burned Dracon's hand to ash when he tried to pierce it. The other Shadowbound attacked as one, and the stars responded with precision that spoke of intelligence and intent, striking down warriors with celestial fire that left nothing but scorched earth and the smell of ozone. Kalen felt the disturbance from his fortress, a wrongness in the fabric of reality that made his alpha instinct scream danger even as something deeper, something he had buried under years of conditioning and cruelty, whispered Mate. He transported himself to the square, using the shadow walking ability unique to his bloodline, appearing just as the last Shadowbound fell, and the barrier of starlight around Lyra began to pulse with a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. Their eyes met across the devastated square, her silver gaze meeting his gold, and the bond that snapped into place between them was not the gentle recognition of destined mates, but a violent, undeniable collision of opposing forces that were somehow meant to coexist. Lyra stood slowly, the starlight receding into her skin, but not disappearing, leaving her marked with silver constellations that mapped across her dark skin like a night sky come to life. Her voice when she spoke carried harmonics that were not entirely human, resonances of the cosmic power flowing through her veins. She told him she knew what he was, what he had done, the Omegas he had murdered to prevent the prophecy. She told him she could feel their deaths like scars on the universe itself, violations of the natural order that the stars had witnessed and remembered. She told him the prophecy was not what he thought, that she was not here to destroy the kingdom but to offer a choice, continue down the path of oppression, and face the cosmos's judgment. Or transform, genuinely transform, and build something better from the ashes of a corrupt system. Kalen's first instinct was to attack, to use every weapon in his considerable arsenal to eliminate this threat before it could grow stronger. But the bond between them made violence impossible. every aggressive thought causing pain that dropped him to his knees, a safeguard the universe had apparently built into their connection to force conversation instead of conflict. He was trapped, bound to his prophesied destroyer by forces he did not understand and could not fight. Lyra told him she felt it too, the mate bond that neither of them had chosen, and she hated it as much as he did, because she did not want to be tied to a murderer, to a tyrant, to someone who had built his throne on the corpses of her people. The standoff lasted until dawn. Two people locked in a battle of wills, while the stars slowly faded and the triple eclipse ended. Finally, Lyra made him an offer. She would give him 1 year to prove he could change, to dismantle the oppressive systems he had built, and create genuine equality for Omegas in his kingdom. She would stay close enough to monitor his progress, but far enough to avoid the mate bond's pull. If at the year's end he had truly transformed himself and his kingdom, she would consider whether their bond could become something real, rather than just a cosmic accident. If he failed, if he returned to his old ways or made only superficial changes, she would embrace her full power as the celestial reckoning and tear down everything he had built. Consequences be damned. What do you think Kaelin should do? Can an alpha king who has committed such atrocities truly change? Or is Lyra making a mistake by giving him a chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this story is about to explore whether redemption is really possible when the crimes are this severe. Kaelin returned to his fortress a changed man, though not in the way he expected. He had not suddenly become good, or kind, or compassionate. He had simply been forced to confront the reality that his power was not absolute, that there were forces in the universe that could and would hold him accountable. His first act was to open the forbidden archives and read every document about the Starborn Guardians, the true history his ancestors had tried to erase. What he found shook him to his core. The Guardians had not been weak, they had been powerful beyond measure, but they had used that power to create a society where everyone, Alpha, Beta, and Omega, had equal voice and equal value. They had been betrayed by a coalition of Alphas who could not tolerate a system that did not automatically place them at the top. The more Kaelin read, the more he realized how thoroughly he had been lied to. The Omega nature was not inherent weakness, but a different manifestation of strength, one focused on community, healing, and connection, rather than domination and control. The Guardians had recognized that all three designations had value, and had built their civilization around honoring those differences without creating hierarchy. The Alpha coup had not saved the kingdom from Omega tyranny as the official histories claimed. It had destroyed a functioning egalitarian society and replaced it with brutal oppression justified by manufactured biology. His second act was to summon his council and announce sweeping reforms. He abolished the laws restricting Omega movement and profession. He opened education to all designations. He established a council of representatives where Omegas would have equal voting power to Alphas and Betas. His council members stared at him like he had lost his mind, several openly questioning whether he had been enchanted or replaced by an imposter. When he insisted he was sincere, they warned him that such changes would destabilize the kingdom, that Alphas would rebel, that centuries of tradition could not be overturned by royal decree. Kaelin's response was to show them the scorch marks in the central square where the Shadowbound had fallen, to tell them about the Omega who had awakened with power drawn from the stars themselves, to make clear that this was not idealism or enchantment, but survival. The old order was ending whether they accepted it peacefully or fought it violently, and he was choosing the path that might salvage something from the coming transformation. Some council members resigned in protest. Others stayed out of fear or pragmatism. And a very few, stayed because they had been waiting their whole lives for someone to finally acknowledge the injustice they had been forced to perpetuate. Lyra, meanwhile, had returned to the Omega Quarter, which erupted in chaos when she arrived, still marked with celestial power. Some Omegas fell to their knees in worship, seeing her as the savior their grandparents had whispered about in secret. Others feared her, terrified that her existence would bring down royal retribution on their entire community. She had to stand in the central gathering space and explain what had happened, who she was, what she had demanded of the Alpha King. The reactions ranged from hope to skepticism, to outright anger that she had given their oppressor a chance to redeem himself, instead of destroying him immediately. An elder Omega named Theron, who had scars from decades of abuse, and whose daughter had been one of Kaelin's victims, confronted her publicly. He asked what right she had to offer mercy to a murderer, to gamble with their safety by allowing Kaelin to remain in power. Lyra met his pain with honesty, telling him she did not know if she was making the right choice, that she was navigating territory no one had crossed before, but she believed, perhaps naively, that forcing transformation through violence would only repeat the cycle that had created their suffering in the first place. The Guardians had been destroyed by violent revolution, and the result was centuries of oppression. Maybe, just maybe, there was another way. The first 3 months were brutal. Kaelin's reforms were met with resistance from every angle. Alpha families who had held power for generations organized protests and then riots when protests were ignored. Several provinces threatened secession rather than accept Omega equality. There were assassination attempts, 3 in the first month alone, all foiled by the elite guards who had remained loyal either to Kaelin personally or to the stability of the kingdom. The Omega community was divided between those who believed in the possibility of change and those who saw Kaelin's reforms as manipulation, a strategic retreat to buy time before reasserting control. Lyra watched from her small apartment in the Omega Quarter, using the cosmic awareness her awakening had granted to monitor Kaelin's actions and intentions. She could feel through their bond when he was genuine and when he was performing, could sense the moments when he wanted to revert to authoritarian solutions, and the effort it took him to choose differently. It was not pretty. His transformation was not some elegant arc of moral awakening, but a messy, painful process of unlearning decades of conditioning while dealing with the practical chaos of dismantling oppressive systems. Their first face-to-face meeting after the eclipse occurred 4 months into the year, when riots in the northern provinces escalated to open warfare between Alpha separatists and Omega liberation forces. Kaelin came to her not with demands, but with a request. Help him find a solution that did not require slaughtering either side. Lyra agreed on the condition that she be included in all negotiations as an equal voice, not an advisor to be consulted and then dismissed. Together they traveled north, and for the first time they had to work as partners rather than adversaries. The northern situation was complicated by the presence of a beta warlord named Corvus, who had been funding both sides of the conflict, deliberately creating chaos to position himself as the solution, a strong leader who would restore order by crushing both Alpha extremists and Omega rebels. Lyra's cosmic senses detected his manipulation immediately, reading the threads of deception and bribery that connected him to both factions. Exposing him required coordination between her abilities and Kaelin's political knowledge, combining her truth-seeing power with his understanding of noble house dynamics and regional politics. When they confronted Corvus publicly with evidence of his manipulation, presenting a united front of Alpha King and Omega Guardian, something shifted in how people perceived the possibility of cooperation. The northern provinces had assumed that Kaelin's reforms were purely political maneuvering, that he was using Lyra as a tool to consolidate power. Seeing them work together genuinely, respecting each other's expertise even while clearly uncomfortable with their forced proximity, made the reforms feel more real. It was not perfect. Trust would take years to rebuild, but it was a foundation. The mate bond between them remained a constant complication, pulling them together even as their histories pushed them apart. There were moments during long strategy sessions when Kaelin would forget himself and speak to her as an equal, sharing insights about governance and the weight of impossible decisions. And Lyra would find herself seeing past the tyrant to the person who might have been different if born into different circumstances. Then she would remember the names of his victims, the Omegas whose lives he had stolen, and the sympathy would curdle into appropriate rage. Make sure you are subscribed to this channel because the next part of Lyra and Kaelin's journey explores whether love can exist alongside accountability, and whether redemption requires forgiveness or just concrete change. Hit that like button if you are invested in seeing where this cosmic connection leads. 6 months into the year, Lyra discovered evidence that Kalen's grandfather had not just hidden the prophecy, but had actively worked to prevent it through the systematic murder of potential celestial reckonings. The documents she found in the unsealed archives included detailed instructions for identifying guardian bloodlines, methods for suppressing cosmic power in Omega children, and a list of families to monitor across generations. Her mother's name was on that list, marked as eliminated, along with notation about a daughter who showed no signs of power and was therefore allowed to live under observation. The revelation that her mother had been murdered, not died of the wasting sickness as Lyra had been told, nearly broke the fragile peace between her and Kalen. She confronted him in the throne room with the documents in hand, starlight crackling around her fists as rage threatened to overwhelm control. Kalen did not deny his family's crimes or his own continuation of those policies. He met her fury with acceptance, telling her that if she needed to kill him to balance the scales, he would not fight back, that perhaps his death was the only real justice available. Lyra came within a heartbeat of doing exactly that, of letting the cosmic power tear him apart, and damn the consequences. But something Theron had said months before echoed in her mind. He had told her that the difference between justice and revenge was whether the action made things better, or just made you feel better. Killing Kalen would feel good, would feel righteous, but it would also destabilize the kingdom and likely lead to a succession war that would kill thousands of Omegas caught in the crossfire. It would prove to every Alpha who doubted the reforms that Omegas with power were just as dangerous and destructive as they had always claimed. Instead, Lyra made a different demand. Kalen would establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, chaired by Omegas who had suffered under his rule, with full authority to investigate all crimes committed in the name of preventing the prophecy. Every victim would be named publicly, their families compensated from the royal treasury, and their deaths acknowledged as murders rather than necessary eliminations. Kalen would testify before this commission himself, accepting responsibility for his role in continuing his grandfather's atrocities. He would face judgment from those he had harmed, and whatever punishment they deemed appropriate, he would accept. The commission took 3 months to complete its work, 3 months during which Kalen had to sit in a chair designed for the accused and listen to testimony from the families of the 12 Omegas he had personally ordered killed, and the 47 his father and grandfather had eliminated. He heard mothers describe finding their children's bodies, partners talk about lives destroyed, siblings recount watching their families never recover from grief. He was not allowed to defend himself or explain or contextualize. He could only listen and accept that these were the consequences of his choices. Theron chaired the commission, and his final judgment was both merciful and harsh. Kalen would not be executed or removed from power, because the commission recognized that his continued rule was currently the best guarantee of the reform's survival. But he would bear the names of all 59 victims tattooed across his back in star-silver ink that would burn against his skin for the rest of his life, a permanent physical reminder of the cost of the old order. He would establish a memorial, garden in the palace grounds where families could come to remember their lost ones. And he would cede half his governing authority to a newly formed Omega Council, making his kingdom a true partnership, rather than a monarchy with advisory boards. Kalen accepted the judgment without hesitation. The tattooing ceremony took 8 hours and left him unconscious from pain, as 59 names were burned into his skin with cosmic fire that Lyra herself channeled. When he woke, she was sitting beside his bed, and for the first time since the eclipse, she reached out and took his hand. It was not forgiveness. She made that clear. She did not know if she would ever forgive him, and he should not expect her to. But it was acknowledgement that he was doing the work, that he was accepting accountability, that he was proving change was possible, even if it came at terrible cost. The final 3 months of the year saw the transformation begin to solidify into something sustainable. The Omega Council proved far more competent than many Alphas had predicted, bringing practical wisdom about resource management and community organization that complemented traditional governance. Educational reforms started producing the first generation of Omega scholars and professionals. Economic opportunities opened as discriminatory hiring practices were not just banned, but actively prosecuted. It was not paradise. Centuries of oppression could not be undone in 12 months, but it was genuine progress, built on structural change, rather than empty promises. Lyra and Kaelin's relationship evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. They were not lovers. The weight of his past crimes made romance impossible even as the mate bond pulled them together. But they became partners in the truest sense. Two people working toward a shared vision of a better kingdom, even when they disagreed on methods. They learned to fight productively, to challenge each other's assumptions, to combine her idealism with his pragmatism in ways that produced solutions neither could have reached alone. On the final day of the year, Lyra summoned Kaelin to the central square where they had first met. The entire kingdom watched through scrying mirrors as she assessed his transformation and announced her decision. She told the truth without embellishment. Kaelin had committed atrocities that could never be fully atoned for, had taken lives that could never be restored, had caused suffering that would echo through generations. But he had also done the work of change, had subjected himself to accountability, had transformed his kingdom's systems in ways that would outlast his reign. He had proven that redemption was not about erasing the past, but about building a different future. The mate bond between them, she announced, would remain a partnership rather than a romance. Some bonds were not meant to be conventional love stories, but cosmic collaborations. Two people brought together to accomplish something larger than themselves. She would remain in the kingdom as co-regent alongside the Omega Council, using her guardian powers to protect the reforms and ensure they survived beyond Kaelin's lifetime. Their personal relationship would be whatever it needed to be to serve their people. No more, no less. Kaelin accepted her terms, and together they established the new covenant, a founding document that rewrote the kingdom's laws to reflect guardian principles of equality and shared power. The covenant acknowledged the crimes of the past, committed to ongoing reparations and reform, and established mechanisms for accountability that would prevent future tyranny. It was signed in starlight and alpha blood, binding future rulers to its terms through cosmic law that could not be broken without consequences. The epilogue came 5 years later. The kingdom had survived the transition and was thriving in ways that surprised even optimistic observers. The second generation of the Omega Council had been elected through popular vote, including several members who had initially opposed Lyra's decision to give Kaelin a chance. Educational opportunities had produced Omega doctors, lawyers, scholars, and leaders who were reshaping every aspect of society. The Memorial Garden had become a place of healing, where families gathered not just to mourn, but to celebrate how far they had come. Lyra stood in that garden on the anniversary of the eclipse, surrounded by silver, flowers that bloomed only under starlight. Kaelin found her there, as he did every year on this date, to remember together what had been lost and what had been gained. Their relationship had deepened into something that defied simple categorization. Not quite romantic love, but far more than political alliance, a bond forged in cosmic fire and tempered by shared commitment to justice. They talked about the children starting to show signs of guardian abilities, Omega and Alpha and Beta alike, as the bloodline that had been suppressed for centuries began to resurface. They discussed the challenges still ahead, the neighboring kingdoms that viewed their reforms with suspicion, the conservative factions that still resisted change. But they faced these challenges together. Two people who had been enemies becoming something far more powerful through the simple act of choosing transformation over destruction. As the stars blazed overhead, Lyra felt the cosmic consciousness that had awakened. In her that night 5 years ago, the ancient wisdom of the Guardians flowing through her blood. She understood now that the prophecy had never been about destruction or domination, but about restoration and balance. She was not the celestial reckoning in the sense of bringing reckoning through violence, but in the sense of forcing a true accounting, a reckoning with reality that made genuine change possible. Kaelin carried his scars, both the names burned into his back and the knowledge of what he had done, what he could never undo. But he also carried the understanding that he could choose every day to be different, to build instead of destroy, to serve instead of dominate. The stars had awoken to defend Lyra's fate, and in doing so, they had offered him something he had not known he needed: the chance to become someone worth being defended alongside. Their story became legend, told to children across the kingdom, as a reminder that the most powerful magic was not cosmic fire or alpha dominance, but the ability to change, to admit wrong, to build something better from the ashes of what came before. The celestial reckoning and the reformed king. Two people who should have been enemies becoming the foundation of a new age, where power was measured not by domination, but by service, not by control, but by collaboration. If this story moved you, if you believe in the possibility of genuine transformation and the power of accountability over revenge, hit that subscribe button and join our community of supernatural romance lovers who crave stories with depth and meaning. Comment below sharing whether you think Kalen truly earned his redemption, or if some crimes are too severe for second chances, because these are the questions that make stories matter. And remember, the stars are always watching, always waiting to awaken in defense of those brave enough to choose a different path. The kingdom of Silver Night stands today as proof that prophecies are not fixed destinies, but invitations to become who you are meant to be, and that sometimes the greatest love stories are not about passion, but about partnership, not about romance, but about revolution, not about changing someone else, but about having the courage to change yourself.